Okay, so how can we reduce this soil erosion and depletion? So there's two main ways in which soil is made useless, rendered useless, or is actually moved away. That moving away part, that's called erosion, and that is something that happens through wind and water. Okay, the thing about it is that plants and soil have this kind of mutualistic relationship with each other, and that the plants, of course, need the soil, but then the soil needs the plants. The physical structure of the plants, the roots and everything holds that soil in place. And also, in the case of trees, they will form a wind barrier so that that can also reduce the amount of soil that is eroded away through wind and water. So as long as those things are still in place, then in natural settings, soil erosion is generally not much of a problem. That is, of course, unless we do things like deforestation and changing that landscape and doing all the other kind of things like people do to do that. So we understand how to reduce those things and not do those so much. So we're going to focus on soil conservation primarily from a farming perspective. And that's because a lot of what happens to soil is due to poor farming techniques. And another source of problems is acid deposition. Now, in the first part here, this is a physical loss of the soil. The soil is blown or washed away. It's gone. Okay. In the second part, when it comes to poor farming techniques and acid deposition, that's when the soil becomes demineralized, loses its nutrients. But then, if it loses its nutrients, then the plants are going to die, and therefore, once the plants die, they're no longer holding the soil in place, and you have erosion. You have the physical erosion as well. So one tends to lead to the other. So we'll look at water erosion first. To reduce the amount of erosion that happens from water, we want to reduce the amount of water that we're using. So we want to use low volume irrigation with a drip and mist system. Now, drip and mist system works well in that one of the problems, of course, you have with low volume is that when you have that low volume, you have increased pressure. It's a physical principle. We talked about that when we talked about water conservation. Well, you don't want high pressure blasting the roots of your plants and washing the soil away that way. So drip systems have just basically a small opening for the water to come out, so there's not much of it comes out, but then it hits a little overhanging plate kind of thing that allows it to drip down onto the roots. And if you see these things, you'll recognize them because they tend to have a cloud of mist around them. That's why they call them drip mist. But they look basically like this kind of, and then we got this going right here. And then the water comes up through here, and it sprays out under high pressure. It hits the top here, and then drips down. There's your drip part, and of course when it hits this area up here, it splashes and sprays out, and you get that mist that's around them. So the mist is also helpful in that the leaves can absorb the mist somewhat, but the main thing is getting that water down to the roots, and this is where it drips down there. So it's a low volume, but it's not a super high pressure washing the soil away as well. So that's the beauty of a drip and mist type system. Then you have contour plowing, is when you farm following the contour of the land. That's correct. So we're not kind of redundant here. We'll call it the shape of the land. Same thing. And what happens is when you have it's used when you have hilly areas for your land. And when you have water that's running at a direct 90-degree angle to your crop rows and things, and you have a dip in the land there, it will tend to wash that out from underneath, erode it underneath. I'll show you a diagram to further illustrate that. But contour plowing reduces that by not plowing in straight lines. When you see a picture of it, you'll see what I mean. They go in curves and everything based upon the shape of the land. Okay. Terracing, we've looked at this before. We saw a picture of this before we talked about water conservation. Water and soil conservation go hand in hand because it's excess water that will carry that soil away with water erosion. So same thing with your terracing. It slows the water down so it can settle in and doesn't wash all the soil away from the side of that mountain or hill. Strip farming is when you use certain crops like wheat and other grains. That the wheat and grains are grasses, and so they have that root structure, like I said in the last slide, that spreads out and holds the soil in place real well. and therefore you can that holds as well. But you might not want to grow wheat. There might be a lot of people that are growing wheat, or it might not be that profitable because of that. You can still plant rows of it and then plant something else. Corn, technically, it's a little of both, technically, with corn. I'm going to go ahead and let you have that point because you guys don't really know. But a better example of this would be perhaps peas, in that these are individual plants. So we're looking at individual plant type ones with a more localized root structure. You know, you can pull the plant out of the ground. It doesn't pull all the rest of the plants out of the ground. Whereas with grasses and wheat and those kind of things, they're connected together. They hold the soil in place better. So you can alternate these with those, and that'll help to protect those individual plants. No plow. I'm going to take that because that's another term, typical term that we use for what they call tilling. You know what it means to till the soil? What is that? What do they do when they till the soil? They turn it under. Plowing sometimes is just flattening it out. This is where you actually turn the soil. You're breaking it up, you're exposing it. Lots of nice fresh soil. It's very good for plants to grow in and to sprout and grow very quickly. That's why they do it in farming. However, if you have wind or rainstorm after you've just plowed it, and even worse, after you've put the seed down but it hasn't had time to take root, you can wash and blow all that stuff away very easily. Very subjected to wind and water erosion when it's freshly tilled. Nature doesn't do that. When plants die in nature and the seeds fall on the ground, there's not something that comes and digs up the soil and prepares it for it. So having the plants still in the ground to do that will then hold it in place. A lot of times they'll kill the old crop and then just poke the seeds down through the dead plants that are still there. Or if it's an annual crop, they'll leave the old crop in place rather than tilling the soil and just push. What they have to do is they have to push the seeds down through that level to do so. In construction, believe it or not, you need to conserve soil there. Call it fill dirt. As a matter of fact, we had to pay $2,000 when we made our house. When we built our house for dirt to build up the grade for it, and it was not dirt cheap, as you can tell. And if you've ever seen like that black cloth kind of wall that's around the perimeter of a construction site, that's made to hold that dirt and everything in place. This is for conserving the soil. It's also to reduce water pollution as well. So that's what that's typically for. So those are some of the ways in which you can reduce water erosion. A lot of it has to do with slowing that water down. And then you have wind erosion. That it's not as easy to control because we don't have, we don't determine how much water goes or wind hits it and everything like that. But one of the things you can do is you can plant or maintain trees. Trees act as a wall to the wind and reduce wind erosion that way. That's the way they do it in nature. That's the way, if you preserve a wall of trees on one side of your property, particularly where the prevailing wind is coming across, you can reduce wind erosion considerably. So that's one thing that you can do. As a matter of fact, in China, they've got a huge project that's doing that there, that they're doing now, because it is a big problem in China. And also, no-till farming. Just like with water erosion, no-till farming is going to reduce the amount of wind erosion as well.